Welcome everybody, and thank you to this month's Contemplating Your Exit webinar series. Super excited about our guest today. Not only is it someone that I've worked with to help them buy a deal, but they're just good people, good friends, and having good success. But before we get into the program, I'd like to give our guests, Caroline Sharp and Mitch Wilson, the opportunity to introduce themselves. And ladies first, Caroline, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Professionally, I graduated from Davidson College. I won't give away my age by telling you what year, but here in Davidson, North Carolina. I worked on Capitol Hill and then worked for several local nonprofits here in Charlotte. And then I started working for Bank of America for 16 years, actually to the day. I started and left on September 9th, 16 years apart. And then Mitch and I bought Gupton Land Clearing, and it's been an adventure from there. Personally, I have 2 young children and a husband of 13 years. And, we are enjoying having, my parents have just moved to Davidson, so we have them close by. But this has been a really good experience for me and my family to have moved into business ownership.
Great. Well, thank you, Caroline. And Mitch?
Similar to Caroline, I came from a banking background. I don't know exactly my start date because it was so many years ago that I just so I can't remember that start date. But I have been a banker in a variety of capacities, including capital markets at the old First Union, Wachovia, and Wells Fargo, and then moved into kind of a coverage role, both in the corporate banking, covering large investment grade companies. A lot of utility companies and energy companies were included in there. And I've also spent a lot of time in kind of the commercial segment with smaller companies through some time with the last couple of banks that I worked at, and was a coverage officer there. And so I've got 3 kids. They have all flown the nest, one of which has come back. Amazing when you fly baby bird, how one of them always seems to come back. So we were empty nesters, we're not, but we will soon be empty nesters again. So it's kind of this, depending on which day, you never know whether empty nesters or not. But my wife Stacy and I live in the Fort Mill area and have been down here about 3 years. I'm a native of the general Charlotte area.
Great. Well, thank you guys for your time, and let's jump in. Let's jump in if I can get the screen to move on here. So just a disclaimer here. My attorney always tells me to put this up, so I listen. This is really informational purposes, and these concepts, I change this each time. These really apply to people who may be in the banking world or any other corporate opportunity. We're talking today with Mitch and Caroline about how they made that transformation from, in their case, the banking world into the world of ownership of a new business. This is what we're going to cover today. We've broken this session down into 5 topics, and I'm not going to read these slides to you throughout, but really just sort of walking through the progression that, okay, when we decided to leave all the way to today, as we are they are both business owners. So let's start with phase 1. I mean, you guys both came, from different spots, and I think for those who are watching this, you guys are friends, and all your spouses are friends, but you ultimately decided to work together. Before we even get to that, Mitch and Caroline, you were both in separate banks. Talk to me about the decision what was driving you to consider leaving banking? And we'll start with you, Caroline.
For me, I had always had an entrepreneurial spirit, had always wanted to go out on my own and have that kind of independence away from corporate America. Financially, I don't think I was ready. I don't think professionally I was ready. I think the bank was a good learning place for me. I learned a lot from being there. I learned how to manage people, different audiences, and that kind of thing. But I had always wanted to own my own company. And so that was that was a driving factor. And it was also, I was probably not, God probably didn't make me for corporate America. I had some, it just was not as comfortable a place for me as I wanted it to be. And I wanted to be able to kind of create my own environment. And so for me, those were some of the driving factors.
Mitch?
I think for me, it was, I, as a little bit of background, started banking at some point in the late 90s. And I had the benefit of growing up in a banking environment. I feel like is almost 180 degrees from where it is today, in that, back in the day before the financial crisis of 2008, 2009, I think banking was much more entrepreneurial, much more collegial. It was a different environment. And when we came out of 2008, 2009, I think over those last 10 or 11 years, there's obviously been a lot of changes in the banking system from a regulatory, environment. And it wasn't the same after the crisis as it was before the crisis. I really, really enjoyed my time in banking pre-crisis. And for some reason or other, as the additional layers of bureaucracy were brought in and all the regulatory issues that resulted from that, it just became more and more obvious that I wasn't happy there. And, for a long time, I had preached to folks, younger folks than me, that were coming out of college looking for a job. Look, you spend 8-10 hours a day there. You spend so much of your life in a work environment. Find something that you love to do. Don't worry about the money. Find what you love to do, and the money will follow. And I had preached that for a long time, and just over time, I became less and less excited about what I did. I didn't like going to work like I used to. And so for me, it was a nagging feeling that had been there for a while, and just all of a sudden, I'd seen folks buying businesses. A good friend of mine bought a services business up in Virginia. And so I had helped him through that process from a financing standpoint, and really got to see kind of behind the scenes what it takes to pull off a deal like this. And the more and more I looked at it, the more that nagging feeling in the back of my brain that I really wanted to do something kind of on my own or with a partner that was out of banking and was more entrepreneurial. There were so many things in my life that kept watering that seed, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
So at some point it was just, I woke up and said, now's the time to do it. And I'm going to hit on kind of the third bullet point on here, because one of the big things for me was, it was obviously a huge risk for Caroline and I to do this. And one of the things that made it easier for me was having a spouse who, when I laid all this out from day one, said, I trust you. I've seen you when you were happy at work. I've seen you when you're not happy. Go do what makes you happy. And if that puts a lot of financial risk on the family, that's okay. And so she was hugely supportive from the beginning. So that's kind of a long way of saying what happened over kind of a 10-year period that led me personally to the point that we were in October, November of 2019.
And Caroline, I know we've spoken about that. Getting spousal support is so important, but was there a single event or a milestone in life? Is there something that actually pushed you from contemplating to sitting down with your husband and say, I'm ready, and getting that support? Was there something that pushed you, or just sort of conversations and you and Mitch hit each other at the right time, your friends, and it just sort of happened? Or, help me understand that.
I mean, certainly, I had, been unhappy in my role. My kids were getting older, and I was not able to be where I wanted to be and own my own schedule. And that became, kind of frustrating. I think that, I certainly had my husband's support, because Mitch and my husband have been friends a lot longer than I've known Mitch. They used to get in trouble together. And and Mitch actually approached my husband, and we'll talk about this later. Mitch and I looked at a couple of different companies prior to purchasing Gupton. And my husband said, I don't think that's for me, but I think that you ought to talk to Caroline. And so we sat down, and what we really figured out was that Mitch and Jim had very, very similar skill sets, and Mitch and I had complementary skill sets, and we thought that might be a good mix moving forward. So I certainly had my husband's support because he brought it to me.
That's great. That's great. Well, let's move on to the next slide here. We talk about the road. Okay, so you've made this decision to move forward. You know, I always ask people, you know, are you ready? You talked about, you touched on this, Caroline. Maybe you weren't personally ready, or maybe you weren't financially ready. Mitch, I've known you for years. I think you were ready, you know, the first time I met you. But yeah, talk about that journey. You know, you're trying to figure out, hey, you want to keep your job, you want to keep your health care and your paycheck coming. At the same time, you start looking for a business. So you went through the whole process of, who do I talk to? Who should I network with? Who should I trust? You know, one person tells you this, the other person tells you that. Just talk to me about sort of, okay, mentally I've made the decision to move. Now I need to find something, and talk about this road to entrepreneurship.
Yeah, and I think to some degree my background helped out a lot with that, because I had been involved in, from the banking side, in financing a lot of these transactions and seeing what goes into them, and seeing how many different constituencies you really need to bring to the party as kind of complementary assets. It may be an attorney, it may be a CPA, it may be a financial advisor, obviously it's your family, it's a sell side guy, buy side guy, whatever. And there's a lot of folks in there. And I had the benefit of seeing that, and kind of had an expectation that there are people I know do it well. And then there's just randomly picking up the phone and calling somebody. And so there was a little bit of a benefit I had that I knew folks in the industry, and I knew folks that did it right. Most importantly, I knew folks who I felt like didn't do it as well as some other people. So when we started on this process, you know, Caroline and I got together, and, you know, because of my background, I said, look, here are the folks that I think we ought to be talking to. And Caroline had a chance to meet them, and then we quickly determined those are the folks that we want on our team. And I think I can't say it strongly enough that you need to find good partners. You need to find good partners that are competent, but you also need to find good partners that work together with you, that kind of mesh with your personality. We have some incredible relationships still post-closing with the accounting firm and the law firm that brought us through this process. Just great folks who are pro-business and really want to see us succeed. And they're folks that you don't mind picking up the phone and calling, because you know they're great folks. You're going to pay for good advice, but you know you're going to get good advice.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's really great comments, and we're going to, in the next slide, get into a chart here to talk about the various advisors. But Caroline, from your perspective, again, you know, you're making sure now you've moved along that timeline where you feel like you're more ready. Your husband was encouraging you and actually, you know, saying, hey, Mitch might be a good complementary business partner. Outside of your spouse, did you talk, and outside of some of the work that Mitch had done, did you talk with other people? Did you do research? Did you talk with other people who had bought a business? Help us understand how you were sort of going about doing this. Because like I like to tell everybody, it's not like going down to the grocery store aisle 6 and pulling a business off. This is not, you know, it doesn't always work quickly. So talk about that process, Carolyn.
Yeah, it was certainly a long process. And, you know, Mitch touched on the people that we had surrounding us and continue to have surrounding us. And we certainly had folks that we could trust there. I have a lot of friends who own businesses. And so I spent time talking to them and understanding kind of what the risks and concerns were there, where their challenges were. I also had a friend in a very similar business. She and her husband had started a grading company. It was different. They had different scope of what they did, but she was invaluable as we started down this road, and really was helpful to me. You know, one thing to note, because I think, you know, while my husband was super supportive, I think it's important for people to realize that other people in your family may have different reactions. And my father is somebody I have always relied on from a business standpoint and a professional standpoint to bounce things off of. He thought I was insane. And so, that was something that, I had to work through and just, let him know that I think it's going to be okay on the other side. And now, he wears his Gupton hat and he's pretty pumped that we did what we did. But there's certainly times and voices of people who will say, this might not be the best thing for you, but it in the end it was.
Well, and it's important to maybe hear a contrarian
Mm-hmm.
voice. I think it's really important. And for those of you who joined a little late, Mitch and Caroline bought a company called Gupton Land Clearing. They do a lot of work for utility companies, Department of Transportation, et cetera. And Mitch's background is actually a picture of some of the work they've done recently.
And let me
and then
assure
talk
you,
a little bit about Mitch.
Let me assure you, it's way too hot for me to be standing outside in this right away. Background picture. I am not sitting outside in this right away right now.
That's correct. But Mitch, one of the things that I see a lot of people struggle with this, and so I put this here on the last bullet point. You're dealing with banks and you're dealing with all types of regulations and laws and all kinds of things. And then you start looking at small businesses, and you're used to dealing with big public companies. Now you're looking at companies that are using QuickBooks. Some have better records than others. I know you and I talked about several businesses you've looked at. The numbers just didn't make sense. The math just didn't add up. The concentration was risk was too much. Talk a little bit about how you went from used to dealing with corporate tidy up financials and language to a whole new language of seller's discretionary earnings and add backs and all kinds of things. And again, you had a leg up because you were a banker, but it's still an adjustment to go from the corporate speak to, owning a business and looking at a small business.
Yeah, I mean, I agree 100%. I mean, one of the things that I look back on that I think was hugely beneficial for me going into this process was the fact that not only had I had corporate world experience where you're used to seeing, audited financials and 10Ks and 10Qs and, everything is nice and packaged out there, to dealing with smaller kind of small business commercial enterprises for really the last 5 or 6 years of my banking experience. So I had the corporate experience, but I also got 4, 5, 6 years of small business experience. So through that process, I had the benefit of learning some of the nomenclature and different words, different language, different concepts that folks use in the small business arena. And you mentioned one of them, seller discretionary income. I mean, I had grown up in a world where everybody valued businesses off of EBITDA. And so to make the transition from EBITDA to SDE, seller discretionary earnings, if you don't have that background, sometimes it's a little bit of a challenge to pick that up. The basic differential is a few things, but the biggest contributor is owner compensation. But I think it is important, if you don't have that experience in the small business, small commercial world. I'm talking about companies that kind of EBITDA less than $750,000. It is a different world out there. So that's why it is more important, if you don't have experience in that world or understanding that world, that you surround yourself with the M&A folks and the finance folks and the accounting folks and the legal folks that do have that experience. And
which is a great segue.
Yeah, there are folks in town who've been doing this a long time and have very long Rolodexes of successes in this space. Trying to get a large corporate M&A person, I'm going to use an attorney for an example, but trying to get a large corporate M&A attorney to work on your $750,000 EBITDA or SDE type company, it's just not a match, right? You want to find people who have expertise in working with the size companies that you have, particularly if you're used to large corporate, or you don't have any banking experience at all, or M&A experience. It's just, I can't express the importance of making sure that you have people that you feel good about around you. And the part where I've seen people fail is they want to have good people around them, but having good people surrounding you comes with a cost. I mean, it's a expensive proposition. Expensive isn't the right word. You have to be willing to spend the money to get the good advice. And if you find somebody
it's a real expense,
who's pricing their services at 40% of what the going market rate is that yeah, you save a penny, but at the end of the day, do you really get the advice and the expertise that you need? So
yeah, it's more expensive
and they
to
do
not
cost.
do it.
What'd you say? I'm sorry.
I said it's more expensive not to get the right advice.
I mean, in the long term, it
end.
really is.
Mhm.
I think it can be 2 or 3 times more expensive by the time you clean up the mess that somebody else has made. I want people on my team that have done this 1,000 times before and can do it in their sleep, and they're subject matter experts, and they know where the stumbling blocks are, what to look for, all those important things.
And for me, I
And so here on the
had a
chart-
marketing. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Carolyn.
I had a marketing background, not a financial management background. So finding a partner who had that background was pretty critical for me. And I've had a crash course in all of that, and I'm still learning. So there's benefit in having different skill sets.
Absolutely. No. So on the screen here, we have some of the different professional advisors, and I know we have some of these folks represented on this call. I see a couple financial advisors. Obviously, you need a lender. I played the role as the M&A professional. We talked about family and having a CPA and trusted attorney. They're just so vital. So let's move on here to the next topic of, okay, you've made the commitment, you've got your family on board, you've talked with your advisors. Now, like I said, it's not like going to the store and just pulling off a business. Mitch, you looked at a lot of things. You were scouring. We talked often. You talked with other representatives, people who sell businesses in this market. And by the way, this sounds counterintuitive, but I encourage people that are looking to business to talk with multiple people who are selling businesses. No one has a monopoly on all the business. You should be talking with multiple people to find the right business for you. It may be me, it may be one of my colleagues in town, but we want you to find the right thing. So as you start networking with these CPAs and lenders and attorneys, et cetera, Mitch, you looked at a lot of businesses. What are some of the lessons learned along the way before you found the right business?
I think I spent a lot of time very, very early on in the process before I'd really talked about approaching Jim and Caroline about potentially partnering. I had been looking for quite some time. And I think one of the things that frustrated me is I didn't really know the type of business that I wanted to buy. I went in open-minded, but I almost felt like I was way too open-minded. And really, kind of as I started this process, the only thing that I had discounted is I said, I don't want to own a daycare. Nothing against daycares, it's just not my strong suit. And it was frustrating sometimes to talk to folks on the M&A side who really wanted to kind of narrow that scope so they could help you find a business, but yet I didn't know how to narrow the scope for them. And so for me, it was much more initially of a rifle approach than a shotgun approach. And over time, I started to develop kind of a tendency to say, stay away from not only daycares, but this business. And so I wanted to have that knowledge base up front. It just took some time for it to develop.
Okay, and I, as a moderator of this webinar, I forgot to tell people, if you have any questions along the way, please put them in the Q&A, we will, or the chat, and I will absolutely integrate your questions. So I apologize for that. So Mitch, you made a comment there that I could take and we could have a whole nother webinar on, specifically when you said you wanted to start broad. Well, we on the other side say, if you tell me you want anything, that's a little hard for me to find something for you. So you went through the process of looking at a variety of different things and ultimately you found this business. And fortunately, it was an engagement I was about to take to market. And I told Mitch about this, and I forgot that Mitch had some utility background in the utility industry. And ultimately, we got Mitch and Caroline connected with the owner. We had some meetings, and we agreed on a price, a letter of intent. So let's talk about the next three buckets, which again could be a whole different webinar, because getting through the due diligence, the legal process, and the SBA process, we're going to condense down to just a few minutes here. But you've never been through this before, Caroline. You're still in the corporate world. You got little kids. You got a husband that's encouraging you, and you're in the middle of due diligence, dealing with the bank that, in this case, was less than ideal. Were you scratching your head saying, "What in the hell am I doing? Like, is this worth it?" Because it's not always a sunny day. So talk how you got through it mentally, how you and Mitch handled getting through the due diligence, working with your advisors, and just what it was like to go through that process, because you had never done anything like this before.
Yeah, I mean, every day was a new thing to battle or confront. But I think that both of us were super determined at that point. We both felt really strongly that this was where we should go, and we were excited. There was a lot of new things to learn, a lot of, it seemed like with the bank and the SBA process in general, it was very time consuming, very paper intensive, lots of forms, having, you just didn't have control over the timeline like you thought you could. And so, I quit way before we bought the company. And that ended up being a great thing for me from a transition standpoint. But it was a long process. But I think, again, both of us are a little bit bullheaded and determined. And so we were ready to move forward.
And Mitch, you've been in the bank world, like you said, last 5 years, working with a lot of smaller clients. But could it ever prepare for you? Could you ever have been prepared for what you personally, emotionally, financially had to go through, particularly those last several weeks when it's just a matter of getting everything done? I mean, help me understand what that was like for you being on the other side.
Well, I think first of all, and I've told you this before, I think you do an incredible job with the companies that you represent of getting them prepared for the process. Due diligence from my standpoint was very, very easy, because you had done a great job of already teeing up 85% of the information, and the other 15% that we asked for, you were Johnny on the spot getting it to us. And that's not always the case. So I do want to sing your praises to say thank you for preparing sellers for what is coming, because oftentimes that's a big disconnect point, and it wasn't for us. But you're right in that the whole process I had seen and walked through before from a financing standpoint, but now it's my baby and Caroline's baby. And so there's a personal connection to it where there was just a financing connection to it previously. And so it was I don't know how to put it. It was a process that we got through, but there were clearly some issues that we had with the lender and a couple of partners that they chose to partner with that drug the process out. And so that was terribly frustrating, but we got through it. And one of the reasons we got through it is because we had great CPA, we had great lawyers that had seen things. We had great M&A folk that had seen things like this before and knew where to push, how to push. Some of the things we went through were, frankly, we thought from a personal standpoint, kind of ridiculous things to have to be going through. But our partners knew, hey, this is part of the process. We can push hard here. We don't need to push as hard here. And so that coaching was hugely valuable for us.
And we had a unique company that we were buying that we really had to, there was a specific kind of lender that we had to have. So you just couldn't go out to any community bank and get the loan that we needed. And so, we were also dependent on Adam and others to help us figure out who that would be. And so, and I think we were one of the larger loans that they had ever done. So, they had a couple of people fly down and meet us to make sure we weren't crazy, actually see the property and things like that. So there was a lot to it that was different that we had not been through before.
Yeah, I like to tell everybody that every deal is different, but there were some things in this deal that, even caught me by surprise. But I will, Caroline just reminded me, it was out of my brain, but I think I showed this to 11 lenders, all who rejected it before we found the 12th one. And so to Caroline's point, there were some nuances, there were some issues with this. There was a reason why the other 11 may have passed on this, and it wasn't. So we had to get that lender extra comfortable, which created a couple extra hoops to walk through. But we did it. I like to reference, again, some memories coming back here. But I didn't know who I was talking to each morning, whether it was going to be Mitch or Caroline. But we had for the last 3 weeks, we had therapy sessions every morning to make sure that we got through this deal together, because we were all invested. But Mitch was correct in relying on the partners that had seen stuff like this before. We knew we would get through it. So let's go to the exciting part at the end of this. If I can get this to move here. There we go. So here we close. Your business owners. You're managing this new business. You've got new employees. You're transitioning with the former owner, who I know in this case was fantastic, and you're still great friends with. You had, what I like to say, freedom but stress, but it was totally different freedom and stress than anything you had ever encountered in the banking world. Talk, Caroline, those first couple of days after it actually went through. What were you thinking? Were you excited? Were you nervous? Were you scared? Did you want to go on vacation? I mean, what were you thinking?
It was such a whirlwind. I'm not even sure what I was thinking at that point. I know that I wanted to basically take the previous owner's brain and put it in ours, so that we could know as much as we could and gain as much knowledge from her as we could. But yeah, I mean, I think that I felt a real sense of relief because we owned our own destiny at that point. It sounds cheesy, but it's true. We had the ability to make it what we wanted to make it. And, we spent a whole lot of time talking about what we wanted to do and how we wanted to do it. And we've brought some new things to the team. I think this was if you think about, I was in marketing at Bank of America for 16 years. Mitch was in banking. And then to move into, a more labor intensive group, there was a whole lot of language barrier there to try to figure out, our authentic voice with them. They're not going to buy that I spend my weekends chopping down trees. That's not what I do. But I think that having an authentic voice is true anywhere. And when you care about the people that work for you, that shines through. And I think that they know that, and that's what Mitch and I really wanted to create, was an atmosphere where they felt like they were part of a bigger team. And so, we've learned a lot of lessons for sure. We've had ups and downs, but in general, I think we're doing okay.
Mitch, what surprised you? What did you learn along the way? What were you thinking right after the deal closed? And looking back, it's almost 2 years now. You probably think back, oh, I didn't know anything back then, but you got through it. Talk a little bit about those early couple weeks and months.
We showed up the first Monday, and as I was walking in the office, the first thing I said is, I am so happy we're here and we don't have to talk to accountants and CPAs and attorneys and lenders. It was the first work day after really, boy, the last 3 weeks, it was a marathon. It was multiple calls, long calls every single day, trying to get this thing across the goal line. And I think from my personal standpoint, it was relief that we closed it on a Friday and we showed up Monday, and Monday was like, whew, hallelujah. And I remember that day walking in, not necessarily thinking I'm scared. It was, we knew what we were getting into, or we thought we knew what we were getting into for the most. But I'll laugh and I'll tell a story because Caroline and I have said this before. One of the first things we did within the first couple of weeks, we were meeting a lot of folks who used our services out in the field. And so one of the first things we did is went in and ordered a whole batch of Gupton land clearing hats. And Caroline and I laughed because it took us about 30 minutes to find the hat, the color, the vendor, ordered, and everything. And both of us looked at each other and you said, we realized that if we had been in the same world that we came from, this would have taken 6 months and 12 meetings with 4 different marketing companies on 3 different, it would have been a process. And we had the freedom to just say, this is what we want. And it was, for me, it was hugely refreshing to start being able to make decisions that were the right decisions for the business. We had to make them and we had to live with the consequences. So it had a lot of upside to it. It also had a lot of consequences because we wore it if we did something wrong. And the hats are only one issue of a lot of things. But, as I look back, it was just that the end of the process was not so good, getting to closing. But from there on, it's been fabulous. We had the benefit of having an incredible prior owner who we're still absolutely love to death. We can pick up the phone and call her at 2:00 in the morning if we want to. She is one of the sweetest, dearest, genuine people we've ever met. Transition was great. It was drinking from a fire hose, but she quickly started to step away as she recognized that we had the competencies to do this, but yet was around when that one-off question came up that we didn't know how to respond to. Bam, she's Johnny on the spot and available to talk to us. So I'm very, very thankful for that.
So one of the things I know you did, because we've talked about it, is, and I like to bring this up with everyone that's buying a business, the importance of not going in on that Monday morning and wanting to change everything, but really sitting back, sort of checking your ego, checking your ambition at the door for a good 60, 90, maybe 120 days. Yeah, maybe you had some shirts and some hats and whatever, little stuff, but really sort of learning the business and learning. Clearly you bought a successful business. The last thing you want to do is mess that up significantly right away. But Caroline, my question to you is this: were you driving maybe 3 or 6 months after, you maybe driving, just around Charlotte or driving to a job site, and you just sort of have this, holy crap, like what we just did in the last 6 months, I left the world of banking. We got through the process of buying it. Mitch and I are really starting to build upon the success of the prior owner. And did you just at one point like pinch yourself and say, I got out of the banking world, here I am, hallelujah? I mean, was there a moment that you said, oh my goodness, this was such a great choice for me and my family?
Every day. That was every day. But I think I think that, yeah, I mean, there were a couple moments where I thought, man, this is really cool. We were looking at a job, and I still had my minivan, which was a butt of many, many jokes as we went to look at projects, and the team called it my truck. And but we would have meetings. It was pouring down rain, and we had everybody who was looking at this project all in my minivan having a conversation about where the project was going and what we needed to do. And I thought, that's pretty cool. my office is in a van on the side of a highway. This is going to work out okay. And I think, there have been moments where we've had to step in to do things that we never thought we would have to do. Mitch and I have been doing some flagging Traffic flagging, we are both card-carrying flaggers. Never in my life did I ever think that that would be something that I would do, but it's fun. And you're there, it's not all the day fun, but it's fun for a good couple hours. And being able to be there with the team and really support them and keep them safe. That's something that, 6 years ago, I never would have thought, that's how I'll use my Davidson education. I will go flag some traffic. But it's been awesome.
And I know it's also been important to provide a little flexibility with your family and your children. And I know that's extremely important to you. And maybe that's been, something that is more personal and more special and extremely, valuable.
Well,
Mitch,
can I just
please.
add one, I'm sorry, one thing.
Please.
I think, we bought the company in November of 2019. COVID hit in March of 2020. So I think that we had done a couple of things that really prepared us for that. We had gotten some things, technology in place that allowed us to be able to be more flexible in where we worked. But I don't know how I would have survived COVID with two children at the time, two in elementary school, and then one moved into middle school. I don't know how I would have survived that, having the schedule and demands that I had at the bank. I really, and I don't know how my family would have survived. It would have just been a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, I agree. And it's funny, you mentioned COVID, and I remember at one point when everything was starting with all the PPP, I called Mitch. I think it was late at night, and I said, Mitch, I think you're going to get some relief. And he's like, what are you talking about? And, he reached out with his bank and got, before this had really been published, what was going on. And so why do I bring that up? For those of you out here who want to buy a business, these relationships with your M&A advisor and your attorney and your accountant, they don't stop at the transaction. I call Mitch and I talk all the time. I run a business. He gives me ideas. I give him ideas. I mean, you're part of the business community, and we're all entrepreneurs wanting to help each other. So, speaking of which, helping each other, as we try to wrap this up here shortly, Mitch, tons of bankers. I'm sure Caroline obviously knows tons of people, and they look at you and say, how the hell do you do this? Or I'm going to join you someday. What advice, is there one thing amongst all these topics, or is there one thing that you would tell people that are sitting in corporate America? Maybe they're not up in the tower right now because they're still at home, but is there one single thing looking back that you would tell your colleagues to consider or do? Just one thing?
Find what makes you happy. Find what lights your fire. I mentioned daycares earlier, and I'm going to come back to that. If running a business that provides daycare services lights your fire, go do it. It didn't light my fire, but there's a lot of things that, different people, different things light their fires. Find something that you're passionate about. And there is a lot of risk. There's a lot of reward. Go into it eyes wide open with some good partners and sweat the small stuff every single day. I think Caroline and I both going into this this is our first opportunity to run a small business. And so obviously you think that you've got the knowledge base or the people around you, but sweat the small stuff every single day, because the small stuff really does matter.
Caroline, anything you want to add before we wrap it up here?
I mean, I think that corporate America has a lot to offer, but I think there is just the grass, in my opinion, is a little greener in small business. So make the jump, have the right people around you, and hopefully you land in a soft field like we did.
Great. Well, you guys have been very gracious with your time and your story and your experience, and I just want to thank you again for joining us today. And for those of you who want to learn more, GuptonLandClearing.com, I believe, is the website, and Mitch and Caroline are I'm sure, available. I'm always willing to help anyone learn about what it takes to go from the corporate world or the banking world into the world of entrepreneurship and business ownership. So Mitch, Caroline, congratulations. Thank you. We continue to look for good news and growth out of you guys. And thank you very much for your time. And for all of you who have watched this, thank you. And for those of you who are watching in the future, we hope you enjoyed this webinar. Thank you all very much.
Thanks, folks.
Thanks, Adam.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.